Welcome to Office Hours with Midland University Online. I'm Madison Keith, and today I'm sitting down with Holly Murphy, who got her Master's of Education with us and is one of the first students admitted to our Doctorate of Education program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. So we got connected through Bree, who is your advisor, and she had awesome things to say about you. Yes, she initially, when the podcast launched, she had 2 guests for me, and you were one of them. And she was very excited. She also G-chatted me before I left and told me to tell you that she says hi. So Bree says hi.
I appreciate that.
So tell me kind of about, I know that you're a teacher.
Yes.
So when did you start teaching?
Oh, I would say it's been a few years, 10 years, 11 years. You know,
Just a couple.
After you're like 2, everything blends together and you're just surviving every year. So we're a decade in though. It's been long enough. I know what I'm doing, or at least I act like I do most days.
And was teaching your first career?
You know, it was one of those things that as a child, everyone said, like, you're going to be a teacher. You're going to be fabulous. Every parent-teacher conference, my parents would come back and they'd say, your teachers think you're going to be a teacher. And so naturally, when I was 18, I decided to do something else. And
A plot twist.
Yes, a plot twist with my life. Yes. Sometimes we don't, as teenagers, like to follow the things everyone believes we're going to do. So started out bio pre-med, and they say, you know, you get to inorganic chemistry, and that is a class that weeds people out. And I was appropriately weeded out. And so after that point, I had to have like a bigger conversation and self-reflection. Yes, I did line up all my stuffed animals and try to teach my brother and make him do schoolwork for fun. Like I do need to be a teacher. And so from there, then I transitioned into education after that point, but luckily retained enough credits. I could teach biology if I wanted to.
Oh, nice. Yeah. That is more than I could do with my semester of a biology experience in college, but same thing. It was OChem that just got me out of there. They said, if you could picture doing anything other than being a doctor, you should not be here. I was like, well, I will excuse myself. See you later. Let me go talk to an advisor.
Productive struggle never hurt anyone.
Yeah, I know. Like, whatever. It's good for the plot for sure. Okay, so you then decided to transition into education. After that, so that was your undergrad. So I know that you got a certificate with us too.
Yes. Okay. So that was my undergrad. I went biology, English, secondary ed.
Okay.
And so I became an English teacher for the Omaha Public Schools after graduation. Did that for enough time to get really emboldened and passionate about teaching English in a way that represented the students that I served. And then that became kind of a launching off point for my career from there. You know, I love teaching English because you read a book and then you ask yourself big questions like, what does this mean? And when you ask those questions, you have to think about how your experiences shape how you believe what something means. And there's never usually one way to interpret something. And so through that process of learning to love literature and teach other people to love literature and collaboratively having dialogues about the things we read and why it mattered, I began to respect a lot more people's experiences that were vastly different from mine. So that informed kind of where I went from there. I did do a stint for a master's degree in English literature that I have yet to finish because I realized pretty quickly that my passion is the books, but it's not just the books, it's what the books do. And that's a different conversation or a different path for me personally. So I got the opportunity to join Midland's National Board Certification cohort with the Omaha Public Schools and got a master's degree in leading and teaching and learning, and then added on an additional 18 hours to get the endorsement for a Principal 712 license. So I got both, and I did a crazy thing. I did them both at the same time.
Oh my goodness. How was that? What was that experience like?
You know, I think coming off of like COVID, we did a lot of things online, and maybe that gave me some momentum and gave me some things to do. Wasn't the easiest to get nationally board certified at a time in education where we were facing like insurmountable obstacles and things that had always been predictable and routine were suddenly no longer predictable and routine. But it gave me something to really focus on, and I managed it I don't know if I could have probably managed it as well or as successfully if I was still working like an 8-hour a day job. And so I'm really like grateful for that. But it was, I don't recommend taking 3-4 classes.
Yeah.
Grad level classes at the same time.
Yeah.
It was a lot of reading, but English teacher, love reading, love writing. So kind of went from there. And simultaneously, post-COVID, we're looking at communities that have been just indescribably impacted by the pandemic and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Omaha Public Schools saw a very different response to the pandemic than some of the other districts saw based on the intensity of COVID's impact on our communities. And so going through that journey of becoming a leader myself in education and seeing the state of my community and where I worked really pushed me to start thinking about restorative justice, trauma-informed instruction, culturally responsive teaching in ways that were really beneficial for the students in my own communities or the communities that I taught, because there's a pretty big gap between what our teaching staff looks like in the state of Nebraska and what our student population looks like.
Right.
I think I was told one time that the teaching staff in Nebraska is 98% white, but Omaha Public Schools is over, I think, 76%. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's about 76% non-white. And so there's a pretty big gap there. So going on that path, that journey then really got me excited about ways that we can use MTSS or positive behavior intervention supports to be culturally responsive in how we support students through struggle, behaviorally and academically, and how we strategically address disproportionality in exclusionary discipline. So it's kind of like my focus. So that's the whole journey from loving to read to teaching others to hopefully love reading sometimes as much as you can.
Yeah.
To reading a lot myself as I try to expand my own professional understanding and then use it to be a transformative leader in my own space.
Right. So speaking of just how you are trying to be more culturally aware in your classroom.
Yes.
What do you see now that looks different than when you started teaching? What are some differences in how educators are going about it and hopefully prioritizing it?
Yeah. So post-pandemic, adults and students were impacted in different ways, but also similar ways. One of the big things in social emotional learning, which I know is a buzzword for a lot of people, is the idea that if you can name it, you can tame it. And in my pre-service program, we spent very little time talking about what teaching other students to like self-regulate, to cope with stress, to productively struggle, to communicate when escalated. Like these are significantly important social emotional learning skills. But it was maybe absent from that preparation program because up to that point, we had not collectively as educators recognized publicly the need for that. There has always been wonderful teachers for, I'm sure, as long as time who have integrated these things into their teaching. I can think of like one of my favorite teachers had twinkle lights in my high school English classroom, things that teachers did to make me feel safe and to model social emotional learning for me as a student. But pre-pandemic, we didn't focus on that with the same intentionality that we do now because we recognize the gap between what our students need and what our curriculum provides. And so I think it's been really informative and has really shaped as I'm going through my leadership journey and other teachers are going through their pre-service programs and finding their ways to classrooms. And we're looking at education that is just facing obstacles we never knew we were going to have to face, right?
Right. Yeah.
When it comes to staffing, when it comes to finding appropriate curriculum, when it comes to bridging, cultural divides amongst people that are becoming more and more polarized all the time. We're facing obstacles we never projected we would see. And so I think the pre-service programs that I participated in were fantastic. I obviously earned my national board certification. So clearly I was taught how to teach in some way, but now we recognize that part of that also has to include being intentional about teaching students what they need to be successful in those interpersonal skills, which can be huge barriers to academic learning.
Yeah, of course. Definitely. So I haven't been in a classroom in a hot minute, but
How long has it been?
I graduated in 2020.
Okay. Oh, that COVID year.
Yeah, I was a COVID grad. So I always joke around that I printed my diploma on Canva, and I didn't really graduate, but I did. I swear.
Through your graduation.
Yeah, I swear. I promise I did, but that is the joke. I'm like, I didn't even graduate. I made this on Canva. But yeah, it's been a second since I've been in a classroom. So I'm just curious to know if these conversations are something that are now the norm in most educators, or just naturally having these conversations, naturally thinking that there needs to be a shift, putting their priority there, or if this is something that you're talking about in your higher ed classrooms, in your TCL program, your master's. Where is do you see the conversation stemming from?
I think the conversations stem from need. And I think that if they were not intentionally created, they would naturally happen as teachers look at their classrooms and realize that the same strategies that they implemented pre-COVID are not producing the same results.
Right.
Especially if you've been teaching for a long time, you teach the same prep the same way.
Yeah.
You repeat that, and suddenly you're still, you're jumping up and down in the front of the room and being as excited as you can about what you're teaching.
Yeah.
And you're still facing students that are displaying struggles with motivation and lethargy and apathy and disengagement from education as a whole, because they had to disengage for their safety for a long period of time. And we're seeing the same things not work in the way that we hoped. And then that makes us have to relearn how we do things. I can't speak for the district that I work in, and I can only speak for, as a representative of what my beliefs are as a student and as a teacher. And I can't speak for things that happen in other districts as well. But I can say that where I work, we have intentionally created space for educators to problem solve collaboratively through the obstacles they face today, and to try to center, one of the district's priorities is an ethic of care. So seeing how can we demonstrate compassion and empathy for all the students who walk through our doors, and how can we have high expectations for every child, regardless of the experiences that they went through before they got here. And so, I work in a district that does purchase social emotional learning curriculum for students to use in their counseling small groups or in their advisement, that attempts to fully staff every school as much as they possibly can with the resources they're given with social workers and counselors, and has community partnerships. We have school-based health centers. We have licensed mental health providers available for the public in the school. Community counseling partnerships where, again, mental health therapists are available on site to meet with students during the school day if that's an obstacle that they can't get to seek care outside of school. We have a social emotional learning supervisor. Just last Monday, we had a multi-tiered systems of support and social emotional learning summit where 650 educators from the district that are district leaders, or I should say building leaders across the district, came together to talk about how can we use positive behavior intervention supports, how can we use proactive plans to address the deficits we see to improve academic outcomes for our kids. So I think it's dual-sided. Transformational change has to happen, not just top down, but bottom up. Teachers can't lead the way. We'll get exhausted because we're already exhausted. But man, when we get passionate about something, can we make something happen? But leaders also have to create space for that to occur and provide teachers with the resources they need to do that, and the guidance and the vision, right? So the leader has the vision, but the teachers are the ones that are walking through the aisles of desks every day, creating that vision or cultivating it in the individuals that they teach. So I'm giving you kind of like a non-answer. It's a complicated web of an answer.
That definitely makes sense. Like I said, it's in my high school. I've been out of high school for a while, and I mean, naturally, high schoolers are going to change in that time, but my experience was so different from what you're describing, where it was like we have the one guidance counselor who's not really there very often. And so I was wondering if it's more something teachers are talking about, or if it's this widespread thing. And it sounds like you guys you have the idea and the intentions, and it's being executed.
Right.
And it sounds like there's a lot of collaboration and making it a good space for
We're
students.
trying to, right?
Yeah.
It's every student's right to
Right. Yeah.
a education that prepares them for success.
It's so fascinating to me because high school is such a formative time
Yes.
that I always wonder how are they doing today? So I like being able to sit down with educators because I feel like they know best that you guys spend so much time with them and you hear the conversations, and a lot of times, students go to their teachers for advice that has nothing to do with what they're learning about in the classroom. So, and again, it's way different now with social media. It started when I was in high school. It was taking off. It was becoming this big thing, but like TikTok wasn't around.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for that every day. But I feel for them, and I always wonder how it's changing. And I think that definitely needs to be a conversation that everybody's thinking about.
Yeah.
Because they're kids and
They
really
are.
at the forefront of so much change all
Yeah.
the time.
I've had like a gambit of experiences. When I was in college, I taught preschool.
Oh,
Yeah. So I've really worked through, and then we haven't discussed this yet, but I did adjunct here at Midland as well,
yep.
which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. So I have the experiences of like, whether you're 4 or you're 40, here is me trying to create space for you to self-reflect and improve and grow and learn. And man, I got to say that sometimes those 4-year-olds are not much different than those 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
Even the high schoolers, they're still littles at heart. They have those ooey gooey moments where they thrive on affirmation and they want you to like them and they want to feel respected and they want to feel like they have agency and they can make choices for themselves and they want to feel like they can see that you have hope for them. And yeah, they might be in big bodies, but they're still babies. And yeah, they need, just like all people, firm boundaries and direct communication. And I think maybe post-pandemic, some of that like littlelessness in their heart is maybe more visible, right? Like we're like trees. Every year we add rings, and who we were when we were younger still like lives within us. It's just maybe a little less visible on the outside. And I think kids today, maybe you can see a little bit more of that interior than you thought you could. Maybe a little bit of like the internal struggles and storms. But again, even my parents had struggles. They weren't the same. But that is just the nature of growing up, is responding to what's happening around you and learning what it means to find like our internal locus of control, to be resolute in who we are, and to make decisions to navigate whatever chaos is happening around you. But, every day I am just floored by what kids can endure and how kids can grow and how children can be resilient. And even though, I've spent a lot of time in this conversation so far talking about things that are obstacles, that does not mean that I don't have hope for our kids. They are worth every single minute we spend trying to improve the future for them and support them in getting through the most difficult part of their life, truly.
Yeah.
The part of their life where they have the least agency to control what happens around them. But I do believe we're going to be just fine.
Yeah. That's why, I feel for that age group so much, because you're like almost adults, you're about to move out, but you don't really have a lot of say in most things.
After being an English teacher for 8 years and a cheerleading coach and a whole bunch of other things, then I moved to the district administration building to be a teacher leader for multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. So I was one of the people who responded to all buildings and programs across the district when it came to creating a disciplinary framework for responding to student behavior or inappropriate behavior should it arise. So that got me in like a lot of classrooms and buildings. I think 2 years ago, I was in 800 classrooms doing like observations and having conversations with teachers about, oh my, like you have some beautiful babies in your second grade class, but they're making you work for it. What can we do? What can we do? Because we get so much time together, and we need to use this time as productively as possible in a way that feels good and positive for everyone in the room. So what can we do? And so I did that for a year. And then, like many people who were forced with the same choice, I was asked to fulfill a role at a building that was not staffed. So then I moved from being someone at the district level to being a dean of students at a middle school. So that's like the person who decides if you get suspended.
Oh.
Yes. I had to do a lot of things and make a lot of choices and help keep schools safe in a lot of ways. But it was the other side to the coin. I had spent some time at the district office saying, like, here's what you do to make things better. Mm-hmm. And so it was good to have the other side. Okay, you don't want to suspend kids. You want to keep them in school.
Right.
But what do you do when this significant safety infraction occurred that substantially disrupted the learning environment or threatened the safety of others?
Yeah.
And what decision are you going to make? Because you can talk about what you're going to do before you do it, but when the decision comes down to it, what choice are you going to make? So I did that for a year as well. And then this year I moved to a high school as a curriculum specialist, overseeing English, drama, music, and art. So still coaching teachers and supporting behavior, but also doing it from an academic lens. So kind of a long list of experiences.
Yeah,
but
so many experiences. But that's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
That's an impressive thing. I say that with admiration. That's
thank you.
Amazing.
More people to impart upon, I guess. You know, I'm not shy about wanting to make long-lasting change from a systemic origin in the community that I serve and being very committed to the work that I do. So it doesn't matter if I'm a classroom teacher, if I'm looking at curriculum, if I'm coaching for behavior, if I'm deciding to suspend a kid, my values are going to be present in how I approach every single one of those roles. And I use those values to inform all of my choices. So in a lot of things, but it gives me a lot of opportunity to really think about who I am and how I interact with the network that I create. And how do I leverage that network to become a leader in a position that has the vision and the skill set and the, let's say, the capacity to implement the things that I know could improve the outcomes. It's not easy. If it was easy, people would be doing it. Mm-hmm. In fact, I mean, there's people trying right now in this very moment in all of their jobs. We are not educators for the money. We know that. We are educators because we're committed to the work. And so I don't want to make it seem like I've got the magic wand. It's just more like, if I know that I want to get there and that's the work I'm committed to, how can I use every single opportunity that I have professionally to get there and be the most prepared to not let myself down and not let my students down, and to create the change I wish I saw.
Yeah. So you're getting your doctorate with us.
I am.
Which is very cool. How does that play into the bigger picture? Because everything I can see where the puzzle pieces are fitting together. What's the spot for this one?
Yeah. So I'm still working on kind of really nailing down, what do I want to focus on? Mm-hmm. What I do know is that we in the district that I work in are already implementing things that research says improve disciplinary outcomes. And we've been doing it for years, like 6 or 7 years at this point. And we are not, in my experience, I can't speak for the district, I am not seeing the outcomes I would have expected, right? We committed to this work 6 years ago that we were going to use positive behavior intervention supports to decrease exclusionary discipline that disproportionately affects young Black teen boys who have special education verifications. So why are we not seeing like the yield from that as quickly as we want to? Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'm kind of honing in. We know what to do. We have the research backing. We understand the theory. But like, where is the disconnect that's like keeping it from going down to the desks where the kids sit? What can leaders do to better prepare staff to implement the research? Is it a cultural gap? I would assume that it's a cultural gap of some sort, whether that is a family culture. It could be racial, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You know, in trainings, I do a lot of staff trainings, And I commonly talk about how I had a military parent who demanded eye contact when we communicated. And so even from like age 4 or 5, like I learned how to ask for my own ketchup at Burger King and look my parents in the eye when I was talking about something, even if it was hard. And that's really unique to my culture. And so part of being culture responsive is, yes, understanding similar cultural traits that are shared by demographic groups, but it's also just recognizing that like families operate differently. That family might like do counter talk across the table while they're having dinner and they're all rushing in and grabbing and talking and laughing together. And that family might, believe it or not, communicating at all until food is over, and so we're looking at gaps. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about things like that and what is keeping the work that we know is effective from being as effective as possible. And how can we support teachers in being the most responsive to students who have similar and very different experiences to themselves. I mean, if you are over the age of 25, you have probably not experienced the things that today's 14-year-old has. And that's kind of scary that even 10 years creates such a gap that even though I've lived it, like lived growing up, I mean, I haven't lived that.
Right.
And I can't tell you how to get through that. Of course, there are some like universal things that never change. We all have to learn how to make our own choices independent of our parents and like leave our own families to create our own home structure. And like there's some universal features. But when it comes to my research, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. What I want to do to help create more effective systems that improve outcomes when it comes to discipline, particularly in urban areas where disproportionate exclusion is happening. Are you familiar with that phrase? I've said like 4 times, disproportionate exclusion.
I would love a definition.
So when we talk about exclusion, we just mean like loss of learning opportunity.
Yes.
It can be small as a child has to go sit in a hallway and wait until they've had a conversation with the teacher before they re-enter. It's like a small everyday form of exclusion, all the way up to a student is long-term suspended, reassigned, or expelled, and they lose all of the learning opportunity that they have. And when you look at exclusion in general, it has some really significant impacts on a child's likelihood to graduate. And then it becomes a cycle. So if a student becomes an individual who does not graduate, and then they have less earning potential, then they pay less taxes. They pay less taxes. They don't own property. Well, in the 3-legged stool that informs our education funding model here in the state, less property taxes means less educational funding, which means less resources to support kids, which means more exclusion, which means less graduation. And it's a cycle.
Yeah.
It's a huge cycle that affects parts of our communities in very seriously devastating ways. And so we want to eliminate kids having individually negative impacts from school exclusion. We want to give them the maximum learning opportunity possible because more opportunity is usually translates to higher achievement. And higher achievement is better outcomes. So when we talk about disproportionate exclusion, that means that if I look at the demographic makeup within a school and I compare that to the demographic makeup of individuals being excluded, there's an overrepresentation of any single subpopulation that is appearing to be excluded at higher rates than their membership to the overall group. And so then that's what I'm really talking about is how do we get students, particularly, and this is nationwide, this is not just in my district, nationwide, students who are non-white, students who receive special education services, students who find themselves excluded are typically in members of that population. And in some cases even can display similar behaviors to their white counterparts and receive harsher outcomes, right? And we could just talk for 4 more hours about how, the school to prison pipeline exists and like all the things that influence and where we're going. But yes, so when I talk about disproportionate discipline, exclusionary discipline, I'm talking about particular groups, student groups that are being excluded from learning opportunities at higher rates than their white counterparts. I think it's just important to know it's across the nation. It's across the nation. It's not any one district's problem, any one school's problem. It's a nationwide problem.
Yeah. But it gives me hope that if we are in, a city, a relatively small city in the Midwest having this conversation, that there are so many people all over the nation having this conversation and things are changing.
Conversations can do it.
Yeah.
Change starts with conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope.
Yeah. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Of course. I do have one last question before we go. And that is, what advice would you give to someone considering getting their master's or doctorate with Midland Online?
Yes. I think it's really valid to go into the work of getting a master's degree kind of right away. Teachers do that sometimes, straight from bachelor's, right into master's, and going forward. And I think that is great. But whatever time in your life you choose to do it, know who you are. Know why you're doing it. You can do it for the pay bump. You can. But it's going to mean so much more if you have your vision, if you have your purpose. We talk about vision and mission and purpose and all of those big words when it comes to organizations. What are we working towards? Know your vision. Know your values. Know your beliefs. And that will help you make the most out of your program whenever you do it. I started another program that I didn't finish because I didn't know exactly who I was. I just knew I liked to read and talk about it. And as I waited a little bit longer, I figured out more of who I am and why I'm in the work that I am in, why it matters to me. And that made pursuing my master's so much more valuable, and it positioned me to have reach. I'm lucky enough to give a lot of professional presentations and to be requested to work with staff a lot in different capacities in my own building or outside of my own building. And I am very appreciative for that work. But if I had not known who I was going into it, I wouldn't have gotten the same value out of it. It's really anything. Anything can be like that, whether it's a program of study, it's a job, it's a relationship. There is no substitute for knowing who you are and where you want to go.
Ooh, that's a quote. Put that on a pillow. I need to make a sticker with that on it now.
Yes, you do.
No, but that really is truly amazing advice. And that's something that I will keep in mind too. And hopefully everyone else who's listening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Holly, so much for being here. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Office Hours with Midland University Online. For more information about our graduate and professional studies programs, visit us at midlandu.edu/online. Visit the link in the description to follow us on social for the program updates, upcoming events, and podcast release dates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.